Hey guys, now it's time for us to explore the conclusions made by Michaels. So there's some pretty simple success criteria this time because we don't have that much reading to do. We're just going to refer to previous concepts that we've already studied, and then we're going to use them to help us understand the conclusions that have been made by Michaels. So could you quickly write these down for me? Pretty please with the cherry on top. Score yourself. And then could you go ahead and draw a picture that represents your identity over time. Have a go. Cheers. So let's quickly get into the summary, okay? So in the last section, we basically look at Meredith Michaels, and she basically says, look, all these cases, if at least they've done something, they've pointed out to us that the body is an important concept when it comes to considering identity. And they're very important. Now, what she's trying to say is that they don't replace memory theory, they don't replace the idea of psychological continuity or personal identity in the traditional Locke sense, but they do undermine it as the, what we call, exclusive marker of what personal identity is. Take a note. But she does then go on to admit, look, given this theory, given the way that I've looked at what personal identity is, given the fact that I've looked at the circular argument, I've talked about the presupposition of personal identity before memories are formed, given the fact that I've looked at the body and its role in generating experience, and, you know, being at the reference point for understanding experience in my thought experiments, like it's still me that's going to experience the pain even though I might think that I'm Ronald Reagan. Right, given all these kind of different ways of thinking about personal identity in the self, it's very hard for us to kind of really pinpoint an understanding of personal identity as a concept that allows us to predict who we are going to be and who we are going to persist as over time, okay? That's really, really important. So, what we need to understand then is that we might need to move on to another concept. What makes you might not be this all or nothing concept of personal identity. Maybe what we really need to do is have a new concept, which is more about a continuity somewhere where what we are lies between the connection we have between the physical and the psychological. And we need to think about it rather in terms of a degree of being somewhere along this continuum, rather than being an all or nothing kind of singular marker, which is what we've thought of in the past with psychological continuity. Take a note. So let's quickly read these conclusions, shall we? While it is true that we tend to identify ourselves with and by our thoughts, beliefs, inclinations and feelings, our discussion of the body theory should remind us that there are reasons for believing that our bodies are, at the very least, important to who we are. So this is why you would absolutely fail an essay or fail any question, which, if you replied and said that she completely dismisses the role of psychological continuity, memory, personality in defining who you are. She says that is a component, right? And that's really important. I would take that down as a note. However, she says it is definitely wrong to dismiss the body as also a component of personal identity, okay? And when you think about it, that makes sense. The reason why that makes sense is because she looks at the Locke definition of personal identity, which is about psychological continuity within memories over time. In other words, consciousness presenting itself to itself through memory over time, generating a link, which therefore informs itself of who it is, right? Hence, that's why we'd argue that consciousness has memories within it, because how else would you be able to be constantly aware of that link and who you are, okay? So she's saying, look, you know, that might actually be a factor for sure, but memory presupposes an already existing personal identity, and you can't say that that's psychological continuity if psychological continuity produces personal identity from memory. Remember all that? It's a circularity issue. So, you know, maybe there's something else that exists beforehand, and it could be the body. the body that generates the experiences. Its experiences get recorded and kept in the brain. Consciousness is in the brain. Consciousness produces the psychological continuity that we also attribute to ourselves, but the body is really important. And in particular too, if you kind of can see in those thought experiments that it's possible to say it's me who's going to be tortured even though I'm deluded into thinking I'm Ronald Reagan. Okay? So take a note. If you believe that last sentence, it's me, or if at least you can see the logic of that sentence, then you have to acknowledge that the body plays a role in defining personal identity or in creating personal identity. Okay? So in considering these admittedly fanciful, which means made up, kind of crazy problem cases, we have now seen that we lack a concept of self-identity that allows us to predict when we would or wouldn't persist through time. So this, to me, reading this was probably the thing that needed to be further elaborated on. I wanted to know more about what she meant by that. Then I can only make inferences at this point. My inferences are that if we take away the idea of personal identity and replace it with a concept that is more about psychological and physical connectedness, maybe then we do have an issue with understanding who we are and what we are throughout all of time, because personal identity has that idea of continuity, and if we have that idea of continuity, we at least understand that we are the continuity being added to over time, right? Makes sense? So she's saying, look, if we try to find the perfect concept, it's still going to be problematic finding a concept that allows us to predict who we are going to be over time. And that's why I got you to do that APK, to really think about that issue. And also, the questions aren't answered yet too, are they? I mean, are you your body? Are you the psychological continuity? Are you a combination of them? If so, what does that mean for you being over time? Lots of big questions there, okay? This might suggest to us that our concept of self-identity is not an all or nothing one. No, in fact, our concept is one which admits degrees. So she's saying maybe we should think about not necessarily personal identity, but a new concept of who we are, which exists along this continuum, okay? If so, we are no longer talking about identity per se, which is an all or nothing concept, but rather about some other relation of psychological and physical connectedness. Nevertheless, we can now see first that the answer to the question of who ought to pay for Schwander's tuition will depend upon which theory of personal identity we are inclined to endorse, and second, that the answer may not be as clear and unequivocal as we would like it to be, because we've got all these different viewpoints as to what personal identity is, especially too, if you do what I think Meredith Michaels is really doing, is she's saying, look, you got to accept the problems with all theories and somehow come up with a combination of the theories that really gets you to think about the physical and the psychological connectedness that we have that somehow gives us a sense of who we are. Alrighty, so that is basically the end of Meredith Michaels. I'll get you to reflect on these success criteria right now. Have we referred to previous concepts? Absolutely. We could not have got the concluding remarks, we could not have understood them if we didn't read everything else and really nut out the theory and the concepts that she was trying to develop. Have we outlined Michael's conclusions in light of these concepts? Yes, totally. Alright, so I'm going to put up a exam-like question up for you to respond to, and then from there I'm going to start putting up some practice sets. Cheers.